That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
It said to me that I work in a very progressive environment. I work in a great law firm. I have great conversations with people on any given day. But I do think that the stereotypes are just so deep. They run so deep and they're so ingrained that I worry about what happens when somebody then sees somebody come in for an interview to say that person has braids. That might mean that she's applying for a job as a paralegal. And that's something that Black women deal with all the time, and we shouldn't have to. And so if there's anything that, any of us can do at any time in our lives to dispel stereotypes, it is, just demonstrating that we are who we are, we're doing what we're doing. And, if I do it with my hair braid, if I do it with my hair straight, if I do it with no hair at all, just see me for who I am and what I'm doing for you. Don't question it. Right. And assume that the next person who may look like me or who may not look like me is probably, if they demonstrate what they are able to do, just to take that for granted. They can do what they say they're going to do, and they've demonstrated what they can do.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Audrea Golding, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hey, Audrea, how are you doing?
I'm well, Merle. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy, I'm sure, amazingly busy schedule right now to BS with us.
It's always a busy time, but never too busy for you. Merle has always made time for me in my practice and in my life. So I'm really grateful to be talking to you today.
Awesome, thank you. Well, the way I like to start out is by giving the audience a little information about you and your journey, and then I'll turn it over to you to fill in the holes and the blanks and kind of tell us your story a little bit before we get into real questions. But Audrea Golding is a partner and on the executive committee at Fragomen, currently in Silicon Valley. She's been at Fragomen for, I couldn't believe it because you look like a baby, but for 25 years, and has been in the LA office, the Toronto office, and now, as I said, is in Silicon Valley in Northern California. Um, she received her BS from McGill University in poli sci. And her JD from York University in Canada. I assume we call it a JD there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, we
Um,
do.
Okay, and so and you were a barrister and solicitor. I'm going to ask you about all this stuff. A barrister and solicitor. It looks like while you were still in school. And impressive, what I find impressive that you speak English, French, and some German. Um, and what did I miss?
That kind of sums things up. I mean, it kind of represents all of the different avenues that I've gone through in life and where my pursuits have been. Do
Oh,
you
I
want me to fill
didn't
in those
mention.
gaps?
Yeah, I didn't mention that you are an immigration lawyer and that
Mhm.
it looks like, from what I could tell, that you've been doing immigration your entire career, but that may not be accurate. So, yeah, can you just kind of give us an idea of like kind of where you grew up, who encouraged you, how you decided to become a lawyer, like who was important in helping you achieve your goals and aspirations, and yeah, and then and then we'll just kind of take it from there.
Sure, happy to do that. And I always say things kind of come full circle because um, so I always describe myself as the daughter of Keith and Faye Golding. Keith and Faye Golding are my parents. And so the fact that I'm an immigration lawyer today is because Keith and Faye Golding kind of had this really adventurous spirit, in their younger years. So my parents are Jamaican background, both were born in Jamaica. They moved around quite, young. When they were in just finishing high school, they went off to different parts of the United Kingdom. So my dad went to school in Wales. My mom went to school in Liverpool in England, and at different points of their lives, moved around. They moved to Canada at one point in the 50s. They ended up in Ohio in the 1960s, and that's where I and my two sisters were born. And in the 70s, when Jamaica became independent, and there was still, great value placed on the work of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, my dad joined USAID and was sent to Jamaica, as a place that he wanted to go back to, and took a project there. And so we had the good fortune of going to live in Montego Bay, Jamaica, which was not the Montego Bay of tourism ads that you see now. But that's where I grew up for the first 3 years. My brother was born there, and we ended up staying for 10 years after the project was done. My dad joined the Jamaican government, and it was a great opportunity to really be in a place that was being developed as an independent nation, as we were growing up, and being in a very different place than the place that we came from in Lima, Ohio. So my dad then, got recruited by a Canadian pharmaceutical company, and took us to Canada. Again, another immigration story in our lives, and then I finished high school and went to college and law school there. And in my first year after I became a lawyer in Canada, in my first year of practice, I came back to the U.S. and settled in California, and that's where I met you, Merle. And I was in our Los Angeles office, and have stayed with immigration ever since. So it's been like I said, a great full circle type of story, and it's kind of been everything that I'm doing now for myself, my clients, or firm. It really is, started out with my parents, giving me that spirit of mobility and movement, and wanting to, just have a life that experience different things.
Awesome. And so, did they encourage you to become a lawyer? Was that, how did you, well, I see you're a poli-sci major. Was that the plan all along?
Not necessarily encouraging me to be a lawyer. Even my parents were, your typical Jamaican parents, where you were going to become get a professional degree of some kind, or be a member of the professions. And I wanted to be a fashion designer. That's what I thought I was going to do for most of
Me
my time in high
too.
school. I worked in a fabric store for almost my entire time, from high school all the way through my second year of college, and I still had that in my the path that I wanted to follow. But my parents said you have to get a profession, and fortunately, when I was in college, I did get involved in, wanted to I got exposed to political science, and then I found an interest in that, and decided to go to law school, primarily because I thought that I would want to do something in a foreign service capacity, or something in
Hmm.
diplomatic relations. And I think that's what eventually took me to law school, and also into immigration.
So how did you end up in LA?
Ooh, Merle, that's a long story. When I got here, when I got to Los Angeles, I can't say that I knew a single person there, but by the time I moved away in 2014, the community that I had been fortunate to develop and have around me, was, so large and so caring, and it's the welcoming spirit of what I say is the Black bar, a legal bar
Mm-hmm.
in Los Angeles that really allowed me to become the professional that I am and to give me the mentorship and the support that I needed over the years in my career in Los Angeles. So, to this day, the friends that I have from Los Angeles are the friends that I met when I first got there. And I do miss that sometimes, being in Los Angeles, but it's been good to move around as well for my career.
I am so glad that you ended up in LA and that because of that we were able to meet. And so I feel fortunate that you landed here. I do have one question before we kind of leave your formative years, and that is, it's I saw that you're a barrister or that you were a barrister and a solicitor, but it looks like that was before you went to law school. So how does that work?
No, actually, you become a barrister and solicitor after law school. So I gotta change that if you found that somewhere.
Oh, maybe I
But
messed it
yeah, a
up.
barrister and solicitor is really the same thing as an attorney at law. It's a designation. In Canada, it follows sort of the old British system where traditionally you became a barrister if you were practicing before the bar. You were somebody who litigated. You went to court. You were considered to be before the bar. Um, and a solicitor was really somebody who did transactional work. But in most, there's no longer a division, or for a long time, there hasn't been a division between somebody who gets admitted as a barrister and somebody who gets admitted as a solicitor. You get that designation. It's the same thing as an attorney at law. You can do either. And so, I think more commonly across most places in Canada now, they just say attorney, but they still do keep that old nomenclature of barrister and solicitor. One of the differences, though, which I thought was very helpful in my career development, was the fact that after finishing law school, you do have to do what's called a period of articling, where you are an articling student under the clerkship or tutelage of a law firm or a lawyer. And back in my day, we had to do that for 12 months. It's a much shorter period of time now for students coming out of law school, but it was one of those practical training environments that I thought was so valuable. And it's, again, what got me into immigration, because I was able to stay, get that practice in the field that I had gotten some experience with during law school, and helped me just really cement what I wanted to do as a lawyer.
And so when you decided that you're gonna come to California, um, was it y- what was the process like for you to get hired by a law firm here?
Wow, that was
Because
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
You know, I moved with the understanding that, the California bar was going to be extremely hectic. And so I moved and decided I was going to take time off and instead just study for the bar.
Hmm.
And so I studied for the bar. And in the midst of that, I was also job hunting because I hadn't gotten admitted to the bar yet. So, I had to do that full 3-day bar that they used to have back in the day. And it was interesting because I really, I had not up until that time really had an interest in coming back to the United States. And so I'd not really taken US courses when I was in law school. I did all Canadian law, and that was my focus. I think I had one US course that I had taken when I was at law school. And so it was learning everything new, both from, federal, the federal subjects as well as the state law
Hmm.
subjects. And so, that was interesting, but you just had to put your nose down and study. And that was back in the day when, the pass rates were something like, 27-30%, something like that.
Yeah.
So it was quite daunting. But what was more interesting to me. I did get through the bar on the first try, which I was happy about. But what was interesting to me was just the environment at the time when looking for work. I mean, I remember looking at the ads in the Daily Journal, and there were firms that still had, must send a photo with your application, right?
Wow.
Only apply from top 10 law schools, those types of things. And I was like, well, I didn't even go to a US law school. So what does this mean for me? And so I started out with a couple of smaller firms in Los Angeles. One that was very well known for being a real training ground in immigration. But that was quite an experience because it was not something that I was exposed to before. It was quite unnerving, because I felt that the firms were still looking at those elite type of applicants, and really there was no sense that somebody, for example, who came out of a top tier Canadian law school, who had a year of practical experience doing certain things, really it didn't matter. What mattered was the school that you went to, and what the photo would have shown them in some way, shape, or form, whatever that meant. And so that was quite an eye-opening experience, particularly considering that the law school that I had gone to in Canada, it was one of the first years when there was a real focus on equity in legal
Uh-huh.
education. The law school I went to when I started, that was the highest number of Black students that had been admitted into that law school in that incoming year. And it was a subject of a lot of discussion, and all of us have gone on to do very well. I remember one of our classmates that became a member of parliament. Another one has gone on to be general counsel of a major U.S. firm. I mean, we all did very well, but coming into this environment, I was quite shocked to see how some of the ads recruiting for young associates, what that content looked like. But the good thing was that, again, through your connections and through the network, and that's why I always find it so important to maintain relationships. I actually was introduced to someone who was the brother of a colleague at McGill, and he had me interview at a large firm in LA, and I was about to take a position at a large firm that was not in immigration. And at the same time, I got a call from Fragomen, which is the firm I'm with now, 25 years later, because I had done, some work with the firm I was with in Canada was the Canadian co-counsel of Fragomen, before we had set up our own offices there several years later, and gotten to know many of the attorneys there. And I applied when I got to Los Angeles, and after I passed the bar, I ultimately was contacted and had got a position here at Fragomen. So, and then the rest, as they say, is history.
His history. Got it. And so, in terms of like, because you already talked about how the Black Bar was very supportive and has helped you in your success in the U.S. Culturally, was it a culture shock to come here, other than like the the process for getting a job, but culturally, what kinds of differences do you remember, or were there that you were like, wow, this is really different from what I'm used to?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Let me count the ways. I mean, I think the first was, the first, as I said, was looking at those ads in the Daily Journal, about, where you needed to come from in order to apply for a job at certain firms. The good thing was I had also been a member of the National Bar Association while I was in Canada, and so I was able again to work through the network of the National Bar, and really get to meet people. One of the first things I did was to join the Black Women Lawyers Association of Los Angeles. And even then, there was a lot of learnings. There, I was new to Los Angeles. I was not a member of a sorority, which a number of or
Me
PWL
neither.
members were. And so I felt like everybody had their home. They had their niche. They had grown up in Los Angeles. They had gone to schools together. They were members of sororities. They had gone to certain churches together. And so it felt very much like initially as an outsider, but in a good way. I also had to learn how to adapt
Mm-hmm.
and to really understand what that culture was, because I think a lot of those networks were formed out of exclusion, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, I was coming into an organization and community where that had really formed and blossomed and flourished because it was excluded from, so much of what was happening in the larger, Los Angeles or California state for that matter. And so I felt that people were more welcoming because, they're, no matter where you were coming from, it was still we were still dealing with issues of exclusion from certain things, whether it was, certain firms or opportunities and those sorts of things. And so I found that, like I said, the Black Bar was just extremely welcoming and making sure that wherever you came from, you had that opportunity to develop. I always say to people, there are certain people that I have had no business knowing coming from where I come from. And but for being in, part of the Black Bar, but for being in, BWL or John M. Langston Bar Association, or the National Bar Association, I got to know people who were, supportive, listened, gave one or two good kernels of advice, or gave one or two really strong endorsements or introductions that have helped me along the way. And that to me, culturally was very different, but I also understood what it meant to really try to persevere in a profession and in an environment, from the guidance that I got from folks when I was very, very new to LA.
So what do you miss about Canada?
Oh, geez. Um, I miss a lot. I mean, one, my parents are still there. And so
Okay.
that's an important, family is always important. And so I do miss that proximity to them. But from a professional standpoint, I mean, culturally, it's just a very open and welcoming place. And I say that with the caveat that we all know that there's no place in the world that's perfect. There are
Right.
issues in every environment that you go into, and not everybody's treated equally in any environment you go into. But I have always strongly felt that Canada has been one of the most welcoming and opening societies that I've ever lived in, and they exhibit it every day. And I think I may have told you this story that, one of the first trips when I was on the train coming home from work one day, I was listening to four kids, and, just that there were four white kids sitting on the train facing each other. And I was listening to these four white kids debate what the best curry was that, that they are familiar with. And I will tell you that they knew their curry inside out. Like, one person talked about Trinidadian curry, and one person was talking about Guyanese curry, and somebody else was talking about curry from India, and they were talking about whose dad, that they knew of made the best curry. And to me, that exemplifies Canada, is that ev- everybody knows something about somebody else's culture and embraces it, not all every part of it, and not always, not every day, but there's more of an effort to understand others' cultures and to embrace it and then live in it and enjoy it, and we're not so much strangers. And so there's a sense that everybody, kind of holds the same road together, because at the end of the day, everybody is an immigrant, right, in that society.
Right.
So it's a very open and society which just still, maintains a commitment to multiculturalism. And so that, to me, I felt like, we talk about walking around on a daily basis with, the mask on, and having to code switch and these types of things. And I felt like in Canada, that was just a little bit more removed than any
Mm-hmm.
time that I've ever lived in the United States.
Yeah, I haven't spent, that's really interesting. I haven't spent any significant amount of time in Canada. My husband and I drove from, we went to Martha's Vineyard on our honeymoon, and then we drove
Mm.
to Canada, to Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
And then we drove from Montreal to Quebec City. So
Mm,
that's like which is beautiful. I mean,
mm-hmm.
just a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. And the people were, as you mentioned, are just so nice and so welcoming. And so, but I don't know a lot about it otherwise, and I'm just interested to know, is there kind of the hierarchy, the economic, stratas that we have here of, how people are treated, or is that just, it's more equitable there?
I think I think in every society there are stratas, right? There are levels, and there's you have the ultra wealthy, and yes, you have unhoused people on the street. That happens in every single society, bar none. I can't think of any society, or unless it's some small indigenous population in an island somewhere where you don't have that. But I do think that a couple of things that make a difference in that society is that there is often a because education is so so important to where you ultimately end up in life. I would say that there is less of a stratification when it comes to educational institutions. That
Mm,
and I'll give you an example. When I was applying to college, and both all my siblings came back to the U.S. for university. When I was applying to college, there was a process whereby in the province of Ontario, you paid one fee, and I think it was something ridiculous at the time. I mean, I'm old, but like $40, and your application went
mhm.
to six different universities, right? And you just applied to these universities. Now, I also applied to McGill, which was in Montreal, and so I went through the Ontario schools. I did want to go to Quebec because I had studied French and I wanted to do modern languages. But there was no doubt that I was going to go to university. There was no question that I was going to go to one of those schools. Um, and it so turned out that I got into McGill, early admission. I had no business being in a university with my background, where in my second, I think it was my second year, ended up being in the same class as the Prime Minister of Canada. I don't
Wow.
know. I mean, and you would have a certain group of people who, yes, go to certain schools in the United States where you may be in a class with somebody who becomes a president of the United States, but that's few and far between. It was just not something that I just thought was I needed to apply to an elite school, and I needed to go to a certain private school to go to an elite school, and I needed to do certain things. There's just a more equitable approach to pursuing education that I think provides you then with greater opportunities to succeed down the road. The second thing is, the safety net. There's hopefully there will always be, and but there is now, so much of a social safety net, which doesn't
Mhm.
exist in a lot of other places, such that you are aware that, and I don't say this to necessarily be, critical or saying, I'll just say it, you'll never have a medical issue that's going to bankrupt your family.
Right.
My dad had a stroke some years ago, and we were for we were all thinking at the end of his hospital stay, like, when is this huge bill going to come? When is this bill going to come? And we were all kind of terrified about when this bill was going to come. And the bill never came. And
Wow.
so you can actually worry about other things that are more important to, yourself, your family, your, all, and preventive health is a big thing. Which makes, be having a country committed to that social safety net means that you can, you're not going to have one episode or some thing that happens that is going to change generally speaking, will not change the course of your life forever. But I think education and social services are, some of the
Mhm.
most critical things that allow people to then be able to thrive without making life choices, um, because you can't afford to do one of those two things that are so critical to anyone's, success and livelihood.
Yeah, I think we've all, heard, and we all are kind of like, wow, they're very lucky to have that safety net and have that, the ability to have, especially the healthcare, portion of that. It's funny. I was looking at something the other day and I saw where um, uh, I don't know if it was on an American or a Canadian redrew the map and said, you know what, we'll take California, Oregon, and Washington and New York. And or like from, the northern northeast down to New York. And I thought, you know what? I can get with that. I could I could get with that because I'm at a point now where I'm like, okay, you know, you don't even know how long you should work at this point in order to make sure that you have health coverage, adequate health coverage, especially in these days where it's not quite, clear what's still going to exist and what isn't, right? So, um, yeah, I think I could, especially in my situation. I was telling somebody the other day, I know a lot of people who are fortunate enough to have the opportunity to get other uh, passports. They're going off and they're getting they're looking up their ancestors and they're getting their Irish passports and their New Zealand passports and their German and Jamaican and Grenadian and all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, you know I don't have that. I feel very left out at this point.
But I will say, I mean, but the flip side of that is where, I mean, I will say there's a reason that I'm here, right? And there's still a reason why so many people from around the world still want to, always want to come to the United States. And the reason why, I returned to this. And part of that is, yes, there's an economic reality of the commercial, let's put it, I guess, the commercial success, right, that one can enjoy in the United States versus other countries. And you have to make that choice for yourself. And for the people with choices, that's an awesome thing because there's so many people around the world who just never have that choice. And so I have to say, I mean, I look at privilege in certain ways when it comes to myself personally, but I have the privilege of having two citizenships, three citizenships now actually, but but Canadian and US, and and I'm fortunate to have had the opportunity to live in both places, and I could do so if I do wish. And I think it's so important that we really just focus on what opportunities we have in our lifetimes that we can take advantage of, and not be so single-minded about that it's always just one place that provides economic success, because I do think, and that's why what I like about the work that I do when it comes to global mobility and immigration is that people go to different places for different reasons. And those reasons can be across the spectrum, whether it's work, whether it's family, whether it's art, creative, whether it's health. All of those things are so important to people's lives. As long as people are in a position to make a choice, and then a system allows them to facilitate that choice, then I think you can be in a good place where people can actually do those things, and the things that matter most are what they're able to pursue, as opposed to being boxed in a corner. And we see that today immigration has become a pretty complex and difficult territory to be in today, but we always have to remind ourselves that it's the system will adjust to what the needs are of, whether it's our economy, our personal pursuits, and what we need personally, and things like whether it's the healthcare system, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's the tech industry. All of these processes, all of these sectors rely to some extent on global talent. And so as long as we keep in mind that there is a need for talent to move around, and for people to be able to for us to benefit from those pursuits, there will be a system in place that facilitates that, I believe.
Well, and that's a very positive. I said on my last episode, the last episode that's coming out, I think next week or so, that, sometimes like I'm the glass half empty person. And,
Mm-hmm.
I have my husband and my friend Hazel is like they're the glass half full. Um, but I would assume in your 25-year career, you've seen other challenging times for immigration, that it had to be, that where people were going through, wanted to come to the US and stay, and they either couldn't get in or they were made to leave. Have you seen has any has is this reminiscent of other times that we're going through right now, or is it just totally different?
Um, it is, I would say it is much different than I've been practicing 25 years. It's very different than any time I've felt before. But I think cyclically, we have gone through crises that impact immigration, right? And this is not any different than I think many countries around the world where immigration becomes a hot topic issue or a topic that becomes one of real consternation when it comes to the larger population. um and I would say the other times where we have seen sort of more of a restrictionist approach around immigration would have been certainly obviously preceding all of us during World War II. Post 9/11 was another time where we saw a lot of restrictions coming into place that and things that impacted a lot of people's mobility. And now we're in a situation where there's a view of immigration and immigrants that I think is driving both of or domestic and or foreign policy, which I think will right itself eventually, but it does impact the view that we are that we the contribution of immigrants is not the same as we believe it is. It will I think will go away if we there's an impact that leaves us in a deficit when it comes to talent um,
Hmm.
and investment. And so, I won't go into a lot of the details of what I
Right.
of where I practice, but I would say that the importance of immigration on every major sector is so critical. You don't have the entertainment industry, right? In
Hmm.
California, if you don't have the comedic writers and all the directors and all the other folks who have come in from the from whether it's Canada, the UK, and other countries. You don't have that industry flourishing. When there was when you look at all the major tech companies in Silicon Valley that were started by immigrants, right? And
Hmm.
headed up by immigrants, you don't get the same level of diversity of thought and the same level of drive and entrepreneurship in those companies if you didn't have immigrants who had those dreams and pursuits in mind to do what they set out to do. So we certainly have seen all of the benefits, right? All of the benefits of immigration. And that's where I hope that we come back to is really understanding that immigration is key to our economic success, and to many people's personal success. One of the fears that a lot of healthcare professionals have right now is a shortage that we have of caregivers and and
Hmm.
nurses and that sort of thing. And so if there isn't an understanding of the importance of immigration to all of those things, and there's strictly a focus on enforcement and removal, and there's no middle room for making exceptions and also understanding where the needs are of the future, then we might be cutting out some really important um support that we're going to need in the future, and it might be too late to bring that back.
Well, and it's not just in the future. It's every day. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
idea that, there are jobs here. I mean, I could list the how dependent I am in my house on
Mhm.
people to do jobs that no American would want to do, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, then you can, it's not just the tech and uh medical and all that stuff at those highest levels. It's who's gonna pick your fruit, who's gonna
Yeah.
who's gonna uh pick your food, who's gonna do
Mhm.
this labor that is so important. And this is labor by honest people who are honest working people. So that's what's really discouraging for me. But
Mhm.
so what do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun?
What do you do
You
for fun?
know, I travel, Merle. I do. I love to travel, and maybe that's part of the still the work side of me. But um, I just got back from Jamaica, and I was working. I was working remotely at the same time as I was speaking at a conference. But at the same time, I made time to get out and I eat. I eat really good. I try to eat really good food when I'm traveling because I love the diaspora of food. Um, that kind of brings you back to a community. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I travel, I do try to just, really indulge in food and being in environments. Um, so that's what I would say. I travel. I relax by swimming, and so anywhere that I travel to that has to have water, generally that's what I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna have to swim in, and that's it. And I listen to music. I come from a somewhat not in my immediate family, but other sides of family, musical family, and I like going to any kind of concerts and that sort of thing. That again that brings me to closer to a culture. I
Mm-hmm.
really like that. I really like that. I do miss the Hollywood Bowl in LA, for example. That's one of
Right.
my greatest misses is a Hollywood
Yeah.
Bowl.
Yeah, the last concert I went to at the Hollywood Bowl was Shaka Khan.
Oh
Um
yeah,
yeah, and she was, the first half was a little meh, but then she did all her standards in the second half. And I was like, she's over 70. I forget how old she is,
yeah.
but you would never know it. I was tempted I was tempted to go to Beyonce this weekend, but I just couldn't get myself together to do
Yeah.
that. So, but I was like having FOMO with all the pictures
Yeah,
on social
exactly.
media. Yeah.
I will say about Shaka Khan that I saw her 2 years ago, and I said, if I never see another concert for the rest of my life, I think I've seen enough just with her show. And I think as a woman, um, performing the way she does with the passion that she does,
Yep.
at 70 years old at the time, I said, I want to be living life like that, to still have that
Yes.
passion and zest and excitement and vigor at that age to be doing what you want and just delighting people. She was just awesome. And it makes you rethink, the path that you are on in life as to what you're going to do and what makes you happy. And clearly that makes her happy.
Right, exactly. So this podcast is called Beyond Stereotypes, and so I have to at least ask you one question related to that. And the question is, what stereotypes do you feel people make about you? And why, are they right or wrong? And how do you overcome them?
Jeez. I this will come as probably no surprise to anybody who listens to your podcast. But I'm a Black woman in America, Merle. Um, and so, any stereotype that you can think of that, has unfortunately plagued the image of Black women in America over the years, I would say is still fresh and front and center, unfortunately, um, in our society. And I think it's just one of it's a stereotype that um leads people to maintain their view that we are just less than. um and for no other reason than, some, like I said, appearance. The idea that when I first, moved to Los Angeles and was looking for a job that a newspaper, a legal publication would allow an ad that said you had to have a photograph, right, accompany your application. If I go back to that point in time, which is almost 30 years now, um
Mm,
it tells me that, today we still make those presumptions. As much, as we have progressed, there's still so much that comes with being a woman, um with being a Black woman, and the view that you just don't have everything that it takes, and especially in the legal profession, that you may not have the same level of experience, the same knowledge, the same gravitas to successfully steer something through to success or fruition. And I shared this story with you recently, but I'll say it again. Recently, I about a year ago, I started braiding my hair again.
mhm.
And just because, traveling and, wanting to do something different. And I remember, and I came into the office one day, and somebody said to me, there's a show called Undercover Boss where you're pretending not to be the boss, right, to find out what's going on in the
Right.
business. And somebody said to me, I was trying to be an undercover paralegal, right?
What?
And what that said to me was that if I walked in here with my hair looking on this some way the week before, I was seen as being competent, a partner in the business, and that sort. But the minute that I did something with my hair that people will associate with being a Black woman, meant that I was playing, I was looking like what a non-lawyer would look like.
Mm,
And I, kind of had to correct him, but I said, and but it said to me, um that I work in a very progressive environment. I work in a great law firm. I have great conversations with people on any given day. But I do think that the stereotypes are just so deep. They run so
mhm.
deep and they're so ingrained, that I worry about what happens when somebody then see somebody come in for an interview to say, that person has braids. That might mean that she's applying for a job as a paralegal. And that's something that Black women deal with all the time, and we shouldn't have to. And so if there's anything that, any of us can do at any time in our lives to dispel stereotypes, it is, just demonstrating that we are who we are, we're doing what we're doing. And, if I do it with my hair braided, if I do it with my hair straight, if I do it with no hair at all, just see me for who I am and what I'm doing for you. Don't question it. Right. And assume that the next person who may look like me or who may not look like me is probably, if they demonstrate what they are able to do, just to take that for granted. They can do what they say they're going to do, and they've demonstrated what they can do. Um, but it tells me that the stereotypes are still there. The stereotypes are still
Yes.
there. And it's really surprising, but it's our job to just make sure we just keep breaking those down.
Yes, and I can't, I started to say I can't believe that that happened to you, but I do believe that that happened to you. I mean, how
Mm-hmm.
many people come up to you and just touch your hair, or like
Mm-hmm.
pet your hair. Yeah, so the struggle is still real. Um, Unfortunately, and the whole idea about, like a meritocracy, right? I mean, it's like, how would you define a meritocracy?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Um,
I mean,
I mean, a meritocracy, to me has two connotations to it. Is that yes, you judge people based on what their demonstrated competencies are and their skills are. But you always have to remember that there are unwritten or invisible skills that people have, right? And I had this conversation with a group of lawyers the other day where I said, you know, we should all have on our resumes as Black people that we are crisis management experts, right?
Right.
There are people who go through life and they will, when they get pulled over by the police, it's like, I can't believe this guy's pulling me over. I've never been stopped in my life. I wasn't even speeding, whatever, right? We have this crisis management skills that tells us to do something different, right?
Yes.
And when something breaks out, whether it's in the workplace or something else, we know that we have to take a certain approach because we know that there will be certain assumptions made about our involvement in an issue. And that's a crisis management skill. And so when it comes to meritocracy, I always, have to explain to people that you've got skills that people can see, you've got things but you also have to inform people about what your other skills are. And it's important that people recognize that, because I do think that the person who went to law school and worked their way through and had to work 3 jobs at the same time probably brings a different skill set than the person who got into law school, studied all night because they didn't have to work, had a car to get to law school and didn't have to figure out how to navigate through transit, et cetera, while studying, while being at school, and then coming back through hours of transit again. There's certain things that we always have to remind people and be able to articulate what that means in terms of the skill set. Don't be bashful about what other skills have come through your profession, your life experiences that are going to help you in your professional work. And I think that's so important to tell, because we live in a society where we are in a lot of ways isolated from each other. And if we don't tell
Hmm.
people what that is, they don't know that about you. And then those things get discounted.
That's a beautiful way of summing it up. I totally agree. And so unfortunately, we're running out of time, but my last question for you is, and you've done this throughout this episode, but are there any words of wisdom, encouragement, nuggets of advice that you would give to folks about how to navigate professionally while maintaining your authentic self, and you know just a little advice, a tidbit of advice.
I think that the question is answered in the sense of being your authentic self. I think people don't people have to understand who they're dealing with, and there's a sense of mistrust when you don't you are not genuine in what you're representing yourself to be, and it comes out, but, whether someone likes it or not. You can't pretend to be something that you're not, and ultimately you won't be respected by others, and you can't respect yourself if you are not your authentic self, because at the end of the day, you're calling upon everything that you've experienced in your life to be able to filter through what it is that presents to you on every day and on any given day to be successful. If people think immigrant is a bad word today, it's not that. It's if you don't continue to say, well, I'm an immigrant, this is why I have an understanding of what I do and why it's important to me that I do a good job for you, then and you're saying that I'm just doing this because this is my job and I'm a lawyer, that's not going to be of any help to you or anybody that you work with. And people have to know that you are true to yourself. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that people don't walk into law firms every day or into their place of business every day and have to comport themselves in a certain way in order to be seen and in order to get through the day. But you have to ensure that whatever that looks like to you in terms of authenticity, you make sure that you're true to yourself, because otherwise it brings on too many other stressors, and then it
Yep.
prevents you from really moving forward. I tell people all the time, like, there was a time when I thought like, okay, well, if I say I'm Jamaican, I'm only going to get all these, Jamaican deportation cases, right? When I'm in, when I was in Canada, and I think people thought that as a stereotype that, like you should do these types of cases because that's your community, that's what you knew. And like, maybe you couldn't do the entertainment cases and you couldn't do the corporate cases. But if you when you connect with people and you say, yeah, but I'm Jamaican, they say, you know what? There was a time when I was on a project and I went to Japan, and guess what? I really enjoyed it. And this was a company that I was dealing with, or the bank I was dealing with. And so now you've gotten this bond. And if you didn't have that story and you weren't clear with people about what your background was, you wouldn't have had those opportunities. To hide things means that, people aren't getting the full flavor of what it is that you're bringing to the table. And that's why, when people walk into my office today, the first thing they'll see is a print of Bob Marley, because that's my inspiration.
Nice.
And I don't hide that. It's important to me that people know where I get my inspiration from, and that's what's important to me.
Awesome. Here, here. That was beautifully stated, and you just wrapped it up in a little bow, and I really appreciate you, Audrea, for being here to BS with me today.
Thank you so much, Merle. It was such a pleasure. I appreciate you, and thanks for doing this podcast. And you've featured some of my, mentors and people who've inspired me too. So I really appreciate being in that company.
Absolutely. And thanks to everyone for listening. And until the next episode, remember that everybody is different, and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.